is just an efficient, this is just a mechanism to reduce the cost of those long-term contracts. So I would almost sort of take those two and set them aside. This structure also has the ability, if for some reason our energy consumption, our consumers' energy consumption, falls significantly in the next 3, 5, 10 years, we do not have risk for this structure. The risk we have is for the underlying solar projects, wind projects that we have. But again, those are distinct from the two. I think to the second point around interest rates, this structure does not, like the current macro interest rate environment that we're all watching. Wow, interest rates keep going higher and higher. And this structure are not related. So we don't.
Maybe I can speak a little bit more nuanced to that point, but
I understand, but like, yes, of course, like in 5 years, when you have like the bond swap, there are like relationships. My point being is that when we think about the macro interest rate environment and this structure, it's not like taking a loan. This structure is not like taking a loan for a project, like a project finance loan where you say, I'm going to borrow $5 million to build something. And, every 6 months, the cost of that $5 million is getting to be more and more expensive. So if you built a building a year ago and you need to borrow $5 million versus today, it's going to be quite a bit more expensive to build that building today than it was a year ago. The interest rate dynamics here are significantly more complex, but do not have that same kind of relationship to current interest rate environment that a more standard like loan for a project or for buying a car for that matter. So I think that like we can get into this.
Maybe I can clarify. So let me just clarify. In a high interest rate environment, what we're looking to do in this transaction is you look at the spreads between tax exempt interest rates and taxable interest rates. So in a high interest rate environment, you assume both generally move. Now that's obviously they're not perfectly correlated. So interest rates are volatile, spreads are also volatile. And what we're trying to optimize is the spread when we go out to market. But to your point, to your question, just because interest rates are high doesn't make this a disadvantaged time to go out to market. In some cases, it's actually beneficial because sort of consumer interest rates going high, oftentimes you see that tax exempt spreads are a lagging indicator. So you may actually have greater volatility, greater spreads as a result of that. And actually that's what we're sort of seeing here and why we want to move relatively quickly to try to get out to market, because interest rates are increasing right now. We just saw sort of some more news and an expectation for another rate hike. So we want to have this transaction ready to go, prepared, and then we'll see if the market conditions are right. And there are situations where you actually just sit on it and say, you know what, this may take 2, 3, 4, 6 months before you actually go out to market, but the docs are sort of prepared so that when the moment feels right, you can kind of go out there.
And kind of in an interesting way, this structure is a hedge against rising interest rates for our projects. Because if you think about when every meeting or two, we come to the board with a power purchase agreement where we say we'd like to enter into an agreement for 10, 15 years for a battery project in Tracy or a wind farm somewhere. And those projects are directly impacted by rising interest rates because they're borrowing large amounts of money for construction financing and then long-term project operations. And so there's a real upward pressure. As rates go up, those power purchase prices go up. That affects our rates. This structure, because it actually has the benefit, as rates go up, the spreads rise between the taxable and the tax exempt rate. Not always, but
they can. Yeah.
Conceptually they do. It actually serves as a mitigating effect on those price increases in the power purchase agreements.
That makes great sense. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions in the room? I'll come back around. So, Aaron, any questions? Mr. Collin? I'm looking. Oh, staff. Any questions?
No.
Okay. So mine is maybe a little bit to that bond element or structure, and so I think I now understand. To Ms. Hu's point, my question is in a standard muni bond, is interest rates rise, the yield goes down, it becomes prior valuation, right? And the opposite in factor inverse. So when we go back out on that 10-year, what's going on with the underlying principal payment or cost or that element, right? I guess on the two we have, not, I get on the one that you're going out with it, you've explained that, but on the two that you're gonna reprice in the next cycles.
So I'll take one example. So first transaction has a 10-year tenor on that bond. So in that 10-year period, the principal will get repaid. itself.
Okay.
So it serves as really a 10-year bond.
That's what you're saying.
And in that 10th year, we will go out for a repricing, basically reissue bonds. And they may be 10 years again, or maybe a slightly different tenor, just sort of optimizing sort of the forward spreads
Yeah,
in order to get the best discount you can over the 30-year transaction itself. But basically, there will be a repricing in year 10. You know, fully reprice those bonds. There is the risk I would consider is that an optimal time to go out to market?
right. First,
That's where, unfortunately, we're somewhat locked in to say we have to reprice the bonds, then they're going to mature. There's sometimes an opportunity that you can actually repay those bonds early. So if you saw in year 9, oh, this is a really great time, you can potentially repay those bonds early and then actually go out to market and kind of accelerate that process. But there is definitely a timing of you have to get it done in year 10, and you'll have to see what the spreads are. In the structure itself, there is a repricing agreement, and that dictates a sort of a minimum discount that we would be obligated to accept in order to move forward the transaction. If we're below that minimum discount, we can actually step away and say, you know, we don't want to continue this
So it's really
transaction.
an opportunity, the risk is opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Not down, like.
That's right. We're never going to pay more on the power.
Right, there's not like a risk in the prices will be higher. The risk is if we had done this at a different time, we might have been able to get more savings. It's actually the reason why, like with these structure, one of our strategies has been kind of almost like a dollar cost averaging strategy, where you say, if these have to reprice every 7 to 10 years, you actually want to reprice you want to have like 10% of your exposure. And so you want to do, instead of doing 2 really big ones, you want to do 6 more medium-sized ones.
Exactly.
So you're like, okay,
21,
this year's a
22.
good year to go to market. Well, next year's not as good. That's fine, because we know we're going to go again and again and again and again. And like,
Yeah.
it just becomes kind of a cycle.
And then we space out our repricings as well, so that we don't have too much concentration where we have to reprice all the bonds at one moment.
Right.
A less attractive rate in that instance.
Okay, thank you. That helps there. And then the second question is, you mentioned about EDCE gets to control what contracts or purchase agreements we assign into the vehicle.
Mhm.
So what's the structure or strategy you guys use for that? Maybe just to help me catch up on the vehicle.
Sure. I mean, there's quite a bit of flexibility in the structure itself to allow for really any kind of assignment that we want to put in there. These are green bonds, so obviously we're looking at renewable energy and large hydro energy,
Okay.
but there's no inherent limitations in what the structure will allow. We do, of course, need to get our current PPA sellers to agree to those assignments, which when properly educated, they understand there's actually no risk shifting, because if there were any performance issues on the PPA itself, the contract actually gets put on us. So that's very intentional, because we don't want to have to change the credit risk of who that PPA seller is facing. So fundamentally, we've tried to structure this in a way that they should all be neutral to it. But of course, it takes some education for them to appreciate, okay, there is an assignment, and usually an assignment, raises some alarm bells. And so with the educational process, though, you're able to ultimately get those assignments approved.
In what we transition, this is something that all the CCs that are doing this now, it's, for the first round of PPAs that we entered into before we issued this, we did not have standard assignment language. Now it's pretty standardized. So,
Industry wide.
well, I would say across the CCAs who are doing this, and there are 6 CCAs who have now,
Four CCAs have done this, and then
then-
another 2 are, 5 CCAs have done this, and there's another 1 or 2.
so that's just become a standard term. So the next round of, solar, wind, what have you, contracts that we enter into, these will not be negotiated. I mean, it will be negotiated, but I think we'll just say like this.
They
is
will
a
allow
standard
for a
term,
prepay related assignment.
and then we would just assign them as we choose. We might decide over time that, there's a better, more cost-effective source of green power that we want to run through the structure, and we have that flexibility.
Yeah, and they can be short-term contracts, they can be long-term contracts. And one of the reasons why we actually work specifically with Morgan Stanley, there are a handful of other providers, but we selected them because they have a very active commodities desk. So they can help support that. They understand the assignments because they're actually trading energy themselves.
Okay. Any other questions by any other members? Okay, seeing none, I'll open up to public comment. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, closing public comment. moving back to the executive committee for any final comments before we move on. Ms. Hu? Member Hu?
No, thank you.
Okay. Aaron, any, Mr. Cal? Any comment? Nope. Anything else on your side? Ms. Marquez?
Hey,
Okay, yeah, so we'll close the item. Are you comfortable with that?
Yep.
Okay, so we're closing this item. I'm gonna ask real fast if I'm, sorry if I may, Adrian, I apologize. I didn't ask if there was any public comment on the virtual, when we opened up public comment for the meeting. Was there any people on virtual that wanted to speak? Okay, perfect. So we reordered the agenda just to kind of help get some matters so that we'll move back to approval of the minutes from April 5th, 2023, which is now item number 4. So with that, I'll entertain a motion for that.
I'll move the draft minutes as presented in our packet.
Okay,
second.
perfect. A motion and second. Any comment? Okay. All in, do we have to do a roll call vote? Oh, boy. Can the clerk do a roll call?
Member Tiedemann,
Yes.
Member Hughes,
Yes,
Member Call.
Aye.
Member Marquez,
Aye.
Chair,
Abstain.
the minutes are.
Okay, great. We'll now move on to the revised agenda order. Item number 5 is now the 2023-2024 budget for informational item. And with that, staff. You know, I start off organized and then it all goes.
So this is our. Well. One note, this is not our draft budget review for 2022-2023. This is for our 2023-2024. So
Rough start.
that's my, I should have noticed. I was focused on the content, not the.
Force, no.
Okay. So I think that the big, the headlines for this budget are, I'd say first and foremost, we are operating under the same approach and structure that we took to our last budget setting. So things that we're going to be talking about and seeing here are structurally the same as our last year. So that may not mean a lot to you, council member, but for those who have been here for the last couple of years, these will hopefully be familiar things. The approach we're taking will be fairly familiar. We are continuing to take the approach of indexing our rates to PG&E, which means we set our rates based on a percentage difference to the rates of PG&E. So our rates look the same as PG&E's. We think at this point that still makes sense from a consumer sort of familiarity. It's something they're used to, so that when we talk about our value proposition, it's in the context of very clear, this is how much it costs relative to PG&E. From the macro perspective, we are continuing to see historically high energy prices, and that has a relationship of actually creating downward pressure on the PCIA, which generally speaking is good for CCAs. So with that in mind, let's go to the next slide. Get into the specifics. So we're seeing, part of that rising price environment is definitely reflected in higher operating revenues. PG&E's rates are going up because energy prices are going up. Our costs are going up as well, and so that's driving higher revenues. We are still, with that in mind, we are forecasting, pretty considerable net income. Or net operating income for the year, and that is inclusive of positive changes for our customers as reflected in higher discounts, continued commitment to invest in local development, and more carbon-free content, while also building organizational capacity. The sort of net effect is all those sort of positive dynamics still forecasting $177 million of net operating income at the end of the year. Obviously, that number is subject to a lot of change. As a frame of reference, in our last fiscal year, we forecasted 230 million in net operating income, and we're expecting to book about 176 million in net operating income. Still very strong, but that's just a reflection of the volatility that you see. So that's a $50 million swing. It's around a 30% shift. That's 100% related to energy market volatility, particularly really, really high and unexpected energy market prices that were observed in December and January of this past year. Next slide, please. So as I noted, the key changes that we're proposing are increasing the Bright Choice discount from 3% to 5%, while reducing the renewable 100 premium from 0.75. The zeros might be off there, but it's 0.75.
That's right. I mean, that's because that's 0.007
Right.
dollars.
Right. Okay, there we go.
0.75.
0.75 cents to 0.25 cents. So, pretty considerable, I think, from a bill perspective. That R100 0.25 cents will now, go from, call it $5 to $7 premium to more like a $1 to $2 a month premium for the average residential customer to be on renewable.
My wife will be happy.
That does have an estimated revenue reduction effect of around $30 million. We are proposing to continue to provide a one-time $50 bill credit to all Care and Farah customers. This is something we did last year in in September. All 120,000 Care accounts received a one-time $50 bill credit. We're proposing to do that again. I think those are the key factors. We are seeing our under-collectibles rates slowly edge back down to sort of pre-COVID pandemic levels. And so we're integrating that into our forecast. On the energy costs side of things, these projections reflect sort of a blend of contracted energy. So we do have considerable sort of energy procured for this coming year, both in the form of long-term solar, wind, energy storage projects that are coming online that have long-term fixed prices, and then some shorter-term agreements as well. But we also do have exposure to the market. With that in mind, we are proposing to increase our carbon-free procurement schedule for the next 2 years, 23 and 24, by 5% in this calendar year and 10% in 2024. Which would result in shifting to 76% and 85% carbon-free, respectively. Part of the reason for focusing on higher levels of carbon-free in 2024 relative to 2023 is we have more time to go and buy that energy, as opposed to right now we're sort of midway through the calendar year. You just have less time to go and procure. There's going to be, generally speaking, less supply available as you get closer to the end of the year. When you have less flexibility for when it's going to be delivered. Additional staffing, I believe, actually, I think we shifted this to 15, not 17, Jason. The FTEs. So I think when we get to the personnel, it'll show 15.
Yeah, I think it's 15 plus 2 from that are a rollover from.
Yeah, but I think that it was 7. This is a reflection of how many new staff. So it's not 50, it's not 17, it's 15 again. We're iterating here, but so it's 15 new staff. Kind of, we'll speak to sort of where they are across the org. And then, kind of the major areas of sort of incremental overhead expense are a fairly considerable, $2.5 or so million increase in our marketing, not solely focused on our rebranding campaign. Rebranding is part of it, but, I would say the most significant driver of our increased marketing budget is we're now really sort of stepping into customer-facing programs and programs that are actually actively trying to acquire customers. Those are, in everything from our induction lending program to our, as we start to deploy our fast charging infrastructure, to our electric bike program that we're going to be speaking to at our upcoming board meeting, to our community solar programs. And so these are all programs that require actually, these are programs that don't benefit from the power of opt-out, right? You actually have to go and acquire customers and get them to opt in or choose to participate. And so that is going to require more proactive marketing expense. We do have G&A increases, largely just due to the fact that we're doing more, serving more communities, and we have more staff. And so those just trickle into sort of higher IT expense, legal contracting expense. And we are maintaining our local programs budget at the $21 million level. It was 22.5 last year. It's a slight tick down as a reflection of we pre-funded last year some local grants. And so because those are pre-funded, we're not funding them this year. Next slide. Like last year, where we set a formula for allocating any net operating income, we're proposing a similar formula. So last year, what we said was we knew that there was going to be considerable sort of volatility in where we end up at the end of the year. We didn't want to commit 100% of that net operating income at the beginning of the year when we knew that number was going to shift quite considerably. So we set up a formula for how those dollars would be allocated at the end of the year. The formula was first tranche of funds go to working capital, second tranche of funds go to reserves, and then the third tranche split 50-50 between investing in more long-term renewable energy projects and a one-time customer bill credit. So as we get to the end of this fiscal year, we'll run through the waterfall, and our expectation is we're going to have roughly $20 million that's going to be split 50-50 between the more renewable energy project investment and bill credits. Is that right, Jason?
Yeah, that's
More or
our
less?
current.
Okay, so what that's going to mean is in September, October timeframe, we're going to take that $10 million and allocate it as a one-time dividend to all customers. So customers will get a one-time, it might only be a few dollars, for the average residential customer. But it's that one-time dividend, and then we're going to be we're going through a current request for offers for new renewable energy projects. So when we look at that and we're doing our economic analysis of those projects, we have a $10 million budget to say, hey, this is a project that we might not otherwise procure because of its expense. We're going to take those $10 million and use that to defray those costs to buy more. So we're projecting that, we're proposing that same approach here. These are sort of how we're sort of projecting if what we're forecasting occurs, this is what the allocation would look like: 50 million to working capital, 100 million to reserves, and then 13.6 split equally between more renewables and a one-time customer bill credit. Slide, please. Okay, so here, here are the more specific details around our operating revenues. I sort of spoke to the increase in the discount. I spoke to the reduction in the cost of Renewable 100. I spoke to the one-time bill credit. This does, make a whole set of assumptions around what happens to the PCIA in 2024, 2023, and 2024. Obviously, these things are subject to change. PG&E's rates are potentially subject to change as well. But this is our sort of best guess of where we are. Next slide. Similarly, in energy expenses, we do have the higher carbon content. That higher carbon-free content adds $5.6 million to our costs for this fiscal year.
Lower
Higher costs because we're buying more carbon-free content.
Yes, carbon-free content.
And so it increases our cost by 5.6.
I thought you were saying we're adding carbon. I'm like, wait a minute.
No.
I apologize. I misheard.
Yeah, so I do think this graphic is sort of the important one to note, because we saw kind of unprecedented price volatility this last year. Price volatility that you can do some work to hedge against, but you don't, there's always the downside of buying too much insurance, that like the cost of your insurance then outweighs the benefits of hedging yourself. And so you want to take a fairly disciplined approach. This is why we allocate significant funds to working capital, because essentially you're self-insuring. When you have enough cash, you can self-insure. And then you're just not paying those insurance premiums. And so against these really, like these moments of spiking, what we've been finding is that it's more cost effective to self-insure against those like very specific moments, and then buy insurance more broadly to hedge against sort of the more longer term trends of rising prices. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So we're projecting or planning for more carbon-free content. What is that in the form of? I mean, is that because certain contracts we know we're already in play are going to kick in? Or we buy more?
We're just
more
buy,
large hydro on the market?
I think the reason why we're saying large carbon free as opposed to specific renewables is it gives us flexibility to assess like what is most available, and you know, and kind of look at the pricing there. Sort of so these would be likely short-term contracts, because we're not structurally increasing our target. You know, the board has set a target, a schedule for procuring renewables and carbon free between now and 2030. In 2030, we're going to be 100% for Bright Choice. So what we're saying here is in this year, in these 2 years rather, and we did this last fiscal year for 2022 as well, we're going to increase our current levels through shorter term contracts. And, you know, again, it allows us the flexibility that next fiscal year, we may say, gosh, the numbers are tighter. We're going to sort of index down to our kind of our minimums, as opposed to here where we're actually going quite a bit above what our sort of minimum levels are.
Okay, so these are short-term opportunities.
I would expect these would be short-term opportunities. Yes.
Okay, so then my question is, going back to the previous slides, going from a 3% discount, effective discount, to a 5%, right, for Bright Choice. If we kept it at 3, could we do even more short-term contracts, get even more carbon-free energy?
Yes, yes, we could. Yeah.
But it is worth pointing out that there's a certain point where there's a lack of supply and liquidity in
I
the
get
market.
that.
So,
Yeah,
So-
I think that's a discussion that the board may want to have.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we tried to do both. I would say that we can do more. I would say the challenge is really just if you set the number, there's a point at which you set it where you do struggle to be able to secure the volumes, because what I'll say is we're not the only entity out there that is looking to buy these resources, and supply lags demand. And what we're seeing, particularly in the renewable space right now, renewable energy prices are actually about 125% above where they have historically been. And these are all for short term, right? If you want to enter into a long-term contracts are kind of maybe a little bit more expensive, 10, 15, 20%. But for these more spot transactions for renewables, we're seeing 100, 150% price increase.
well, I would say significantly more, right? Maybe up to 3x.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
300% price.
Yeah.
Now, we're not closing on all those.
But again, the issue is like you're getting this, like, you know, sort of in finance, it's the classic short squeeze. It's the market is short and the demand is driving more, so you're squeezing the prices up. So there's a point at which you say, is it really worth paying 2x, 3x for resources that are from an operating unit that are not going to go to drive more incremental? And that was part of our philosophy for why we wanted to actually reserve, instead of buying more in the short run, let's take some of those dollars so that we invest in more long-term projects.
That's more things built. I get that. Yeah, I just.
Understood that.
The 3% is already twice the discount than we originally created when we first started.
I think the one rationale, if you look at you go back a slide to no. There's the operating. So what we're seeing is rates are going up, right? And so if you look at like our electricity, our revenues are a reflection of what our rates are. That's what our customers are paying.
Yeah.
From one year to the next, you're seeing a, $80 million, $70 million increase. So that's that's almost 10% increase, a little bit less, around like an 8% increase in consumer costs. So we're trying to be part of what reason why we're increasing our discounts. We want to be mindful of the fact that that's hitting people in their pocketbooks, and trying to find that balance between affordability and clean is important. So that's our rationale. But again, Dan, I totally understand that perspective, and that's why we're presenting this as a draft, and we want feedback. So,
All right, thank you.
can we go forward probably 2 slides? Okay. So overhead expense. Going to talk about personnel. That's probably our single biggest driver of our increases in overhead are personnel related. Now you'll note, well, why is our we budgeted 15.7 and we're our expected is more like 13.3. Why is that? Well, that's largely for 2 reasons. One is when we budget personnel, we fully load a new position salary for the whole fiscal year. But we actually don't know when those people are going to start. So we say we're going to hire 10 new people. We fully load their year salary against the budget, because after that, even though in that fiscal year, you may hire 1 a month, and its contribution to your personnel expense is lower than forecast. The following year, it's going to be fully loaded. So by fully loading the budget, the personnel budget with the full year salary, we're sort of giving a preview of not what our personnel costs are necessarily going to be in the next year, when you're just going to hire people over time, but what it's going to be in the long run. So this is more a reflection probably of, at this staffing level, this is what our long run personnel costs are going to be if you don't continue to staff up.
No vacancy saving.
Right, exactly. So we'll speak a little bit more to the marketing here. And so anyway, these are the numbers. I will get into more detail as we go through the specific slides. Next slide, please. Okay, personnel. So in this current budget, we're seeking to add, again, I'm sorry, I neglected to sort of make the modification of 17 here, but it is reflected in the coming slide. So it's 15 FTEs. We are projecting a 3.5% cost of living adjustment. I think we're looking to see where Alameda County lands. That's usually our index for our cost of living adjustment, is what Alameda County is applying for Alameda County county staff. And up to a 10% merit-based / promotional compensation pool. One thing we are looking at doing, kind of this year is today in all of our positions, we have salary ranges. One of the downsides of a range is that, people who ask for more may end up getting more, even if they're doing the same work as somebody else. And so what we're shifting to is more of a postage stamp approach, that, every job will have a classification. It'll be a 2B classification or 2C classification, and every one of those classes across the organization will have the same salary level, so that there's really no question as to sort of, if I'm a 2B and you're a 2B, we have the same salary. Now, compensation may be different for those people based on performance, but that performance compensation will be over time. We're shifting towards a bonus-based approach. That bonus will be generated based on a mix of personal and organizational performance. The hope being this is going to create a much more transparent view of what people are paid and why they're paid. Next slide, please. Here is a bit of an eye chart, but it is our org chart, our current org chart of our current staff without new positions. So, next slide, please. So in terms of our new roles, right, it is, I'm sorry, the two were the two carryovers. That was what I had.
Yeah, it's 15
Yeah.
incremental, really.
Yeah, 15
budget.
increment, and we have two that we have not yet hired. So 2 in our data technology, 2 in our marketing, 3 in our marketing account services, 2 new positions in operations, admin, finance, 3 in power resources, 3 in programs, 2 in public policy. Next slide, please. So these are the specific positions we're looking to hire. Happy to go into more detail here, but again, it's, I think that the 3 teams that we're seeing the biggest hiring are power resources, and it's just as you get more contracts, there's just more work to do, right? And so some of this reflects that, some of this reflects an effort to try to insource. So settlements, as an example, we currently rely to some degree on NCPA to do some of our settlements work. We feel like there's value in having a in-house person who is focused more on that work. Example. Similarly with CAISO Day Ahead Manager. In our programs, we're just doing more programs, right? We're actually going to market. So, you think about our critical facilities. Over the last 2 years, we've been negotiating these projects. Now we're actually in the execution phase, and we're seeking to ramp up from 30 to 100 sites in the next year. So just, it's just people, more work, more people time,
Maturity of organization.
maturity of organization. Exactly right.
Can I ask a quick question on this? So going back to your overhead costs, your personnel costs, I get the concept of no vacancies taken, right? So if you desire to bring someone on Q1 and they don't start until Q3, you realize that savings from that vacant position when you do a mid-year update or wherever you do it, unspent dollars. But when you do have a desired start date that is spread throughout the year, as I've noticed in here, maybe because I can read it on this size, like Q3, the second one down, do you budget a full year's salary for this year, or are you budgeting only 2 quarters of salary?
So we budget a full year,
Even though we know.
yeah, and then we just, again, part of it is just because we want to give an indication of what our what our fully
For an
staffed, ongoing,
So at the end of the year, what is your kind of run rate?
as opposed to, because, if you backload it, you say, well, look, then you kind of get a surprise the next year saying, wow, why are personnel costs so much higher?
Yeah.
Because, whoa, we hired these people in Q4, and now we're fully burdening the following year with 100%, as opposed to, and it also, look, I think the desired dates are a reflection of some jobs are harder to
Perfect
hire.
world.
And so we, I think we might say, like, actually, we found a really great data engineer, or, we've
Earlier than we
or
expected.
earlier than we expected, or we focused on going out to market for that position faster than we would have expected.
I was gonna ask the 2 carryover positions, but I see them listed now. Sorry, it's hard to read on.
Yeah.
Zoom in. Okay.
All right, thank you.
And were those just unsuccessful recruitments, or why were they carryovers?
I think it was just prioritization. We've hired a lot of people. And so we've focused on, other than there's been some attrition, there've been some people who've left. And so that is actually, we've then turned around and focused on hiring for new positions. So that's generally why.
Can you explain our HR department? Is all the recruitment internal, or are we consulting?
Yeah, do you want to go back to the org chart? It's a little hard to see, I'm sorry. So we have a 3-person HR department. And so currently we do most, I'm sorry.
Yeah, maybe.
Currently,
Magnifying glass, right?
currently, we do drive most of our recruiting, though I would say in some instances, we do have a contract staffing agency that we pay on an hourly basis, as opposed to sort of success fee, so that we can supplement our capabilities there. And so what we
Somebody With so many open positions.
Yeah, and we've also like for some of the really specialty positions, so we'll take like director of origination was a position we just recently hired for. That's a pretty specialized role. And you know, we've used that Pivotal, which is the agency, to support for some of the specialized positions where they're going out and looking at LinkedIn and really trying to sort of do more in-depth. Not to say that we can't do that ourselves, but that's a nice kind of force multiplier for some of those specialized roles.
It's a mix of sort of active and passive or recruitment, so.
Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, oh, back one. Back one. So marketing, you know, here the big one really is a pretty significant increase in advertising and communications. As noted, you know, the two sort of big drivers here are so as we think about sort of rebranding, there's website development, there's just significant effort that goes in. Sort of it's a one-time you know, upfront investment in sort of redeveloping the website. And I would say it's when I relate it to rebranding, it's not just rebranding the name, right? It's really this rebranding or refocus philosophy around being more sort of consumer facing for a lot of our programs. So let's just take the electric bike program that we're going to roll out. We will be subject to board approval. We will be administering the largest electric bike program in the state of California. So, you know, we can't just, if we hope to be successful in engaging with, you know, residents, we can't just sort of say, well, we're going to do the same. We're going to use the same tools that we currently have. They're not really designed around engaging people, you know, creating better user experiences for things like signing up. And so, you know, that is a big focus in redeveloping our website, is to make it much more consumer friendly and user friendly as we try to start to engage with people to actually get them to do things more proactively.
So on that note, what are we doing about language accessibility? Are we translating?
Yeah, so we translate. I think we do, or off the top of my head, I think we have most of the website is fully dual language. And then aspects of it, we have it in a third language. And then we have sort of a Google service, so that gives you sort of the full range of 50, 100 different languages that you can use to translate the website into. But I think and typically, like with our mailers, with our website, with all customer communications, we try to do English, Spanish, and Chinese, I believe, are the three that we that we sort of focus on as, you know, for sort of I call it like sort of native language, as opposed to translation services that you click on and then you can. So next slide, please. So legal, we are seeing a pretty, you know, significant increase in our legal budget. You know, we did see an underspend. The major driver of our underspend was we had budgeted very significant regulatory legal expense this last fiscal year that we were successfully able to shift to. We were projecting we were going to have to pay for it, and we were able to shift the costs to our trade association. So instead of being, you know, on the hook for all of it, we're on the hook for 1/20th of it. And these were related, you know, specifically to the power charge engagement around the power charge and difference adjustment at the CPUC. So that was, you know, that was to our benefit. But for this next fiscal year, well, we are projecting sort of a handful of drivers. I'd say the biggest ones are pending and ongoing litigation expense that I just am not able to sort of go into much more detail around. And we have this large RFO. And so there's significant legal expense that goes into the negotiating of the contracts for these big renewable energy projects. we are also seeing just more volume as we're doing more local programs. There's just more contracts that you have to review. And as we grow as an organization and we're doing more, there's just more work. We did see an increase in our legislative consultants. This is really a function of, we did hire a federal advocacy firm, that's really focused on helping us navigate all of the federal funding opportunities. So just Department of Energy, Department of, really, I think a lot of it's Department of Energy, honestly. But through the Inflation Reduction Act, there are tens of billions of dollars of funds that are going out. And so it can be a bit Byzantine to sort of navigate the kind of various rules. And so we retained a firm, Townsend Consulting, who actually I think work with a handful of cities to help us with that.
Do we track the grant funding we've received on an annual basis?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
We do.
can you give us a sense this last year?
Yeah, actually, if you want to go all, Adrian, can we go to the income statement slide? The very, you can see it in, Jason, maybe you just want
First slide.
yeah, first slide.
Second.
Yeah, that one.
Okay. No, next one, right? No, these are
What are we looking for?
Grant funding.
grant funding.
Oh, grant funding. That.
One of the local programs slides.
Not exactly on this.
It's not, okay, it's not on this, we do break it, I think
It is a local program.
it's in our local programs.
It's parsed out though.
Or it is parsed out, and it should be parsed out as,
Might be the
it should be
last
parsed out as
slide.
income, it should be parsed out as.
On
income.
slide 18.
Yeah, it's in there.
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, you're invited in there, grants.
Got it, okay.
And actually, these grants don't, because we have not booked them, these do not reflect, like, we had a $3 million federal earmark. So that has not been booked from like a income statement perspective. That's not been
Awarded.
awarded. We haven't actually received the funds yet. And when we go back, we are going after significant funding opportunities. Okay. All right, next slide, please. So other professional services, largely the same from last year. We did have a pretty meaningful underspend, which I think just as a function of being able to do more internally and not having to rely as much on external consultants. To your question around HR consulting, last year we actually budgeted $1 million for HR consultants, but we were able to bring staff on board faster, and they were, I would say, more effective than we had forecast, which is a great thing. So we did not actually have to use as many of the outside consultants for staffing. And that resulted in kind of a almost $700,000 underspend there. Okay. Next slide. And so then, our general G&A, big increases, small equipment. That's really just a function of, as you hire more people, you have to buy more stuff. We are projecting higher rent and utilities. This is largely a function of the fact that we're sort of shifting our real estate strategy to one of focused around lease. So what you would see earlier is we have a significant reduction in our capital expenses because we're not going to be pursuing a renovation and a higher higher rent and utilities expense because we're going to be continuing to lease office space. And I think the other things just sort of reflect growing staff. So slightly higher cost for conference professional development, board and directors fees have gone up because we've increased the stipend, the like. Okay, next slide. Actually, so yeah, here's where you see the grants, right? So $1.1 million in non-operating activity. Those were grants that we received largely from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and and some of like the California Energy Commission and the Air District. This is where it's hard to project grants. If we win them, great, and we'll book them. But our hope is to get some pretty considerable grants, particularly from the Department of Energy this year. This is also where you will see, loan proceeds. So we did the Forum Mobility loan. We have a loan outstanding to Block Power. These do get, and we also just have interest income on our cash balances, and does get reflected in our interest income. This is really where you see the effect of higher rates, interest rates too. We're suddenly putting money at a 4% CD, and historically it's been a 1% CD, where you're going to see more interest income here. I think the big highlight, and we'll get to a little more detail here though, is local development. Speak to that in a minute. Okay, next slide. And this is also where you see capital expenditures. So last year we forecast a $7 million capital expense, which we're not, we're spending, which we're not going to be pursuing. Next slide, please. So local development last year, our local development budget was 22.5. This year it's 21 million. And here's the split, 11.75 for transportation electrification. This is, for the most part, these are continuations of ongoing initiatives, just continuing to fund them. 7 million for building electrification. Though we offer an energy efficiency program that is funded by the California Public Utilities Commission. So while it's 13.5 million over 3 years, it's no direct cost to us. Community resilience and local renewables, 2 million. Community grants are pre-funded, so we're not contributing this year because we have the funds allocated, and then sponsorships and memberships. Next slide, please. Is that it? Okay. Did not go this, because this is sort of our first round. We did not go into a lot of detail, especially in local development. Typically, we'll provide 10 or 15 slides going specifically into great depth around each one of the program areas. I can speak to them if there are questions, but because we're going to be coming back in 2 weeks, figured that would be, that's when we're gonna go more in depth there.
Okay, so we'll open it up to questions like we did last time. And since this member who is virtual, we'll go there first. I presume she's still with us. Any questions?
So actually, thank you for this summary. And I just feel like I just be a little bit for FTE 17 addition sounds like a lot to me. And I'm sure there's a lot of things I don't know about, I want to also look at from a sense of what has the current work the current employees are doing, and to justify why would we need this 17 additional FTEs, and what kind of work they will do, and what kind of benefits or additional products that we will get from them. So this is one of my concern about FTEs. And another thing is I just capture a little thing, like you said, the last one for the local development project, you already have $2 million from previous years, so didn't allocate for this year. So should we always allocate something on our budget so we can have money for next year? So that's just a simple question. So
Typically we would do that more at the end of the year when we think about allocation of reserves, that you would say, we've reserved funds. I think last year we decided it was somewhat unique because we wanted to set up this community grants initiative. And so we felt like you want to ensure you have continuity in these grants. So it wasn't just one round of grants. We want to do grants every year for 3 years. And so at that time, we decided that it was worth, the board decided that they wanted to refund 3 years of it. I think you could set aside funds for future years, but it would be pretty uncertain what those funds would be used for. I think to the question around staffing, we're still a young agency. And so a lot of our staffing up is just a reflection of catching up. And historical reliance on outside resources to do work that we're over time bringing in-house. So I'll give you a specific example. So today, we outsource essentially all kind of work that I would call paralegal work. So kind of the initial review of consulting contracts, non-disclosure agreements. There's just a tremendous amount of flow of, I would say, not particularly complex, but mission critical legal documentation. That's something that we can currently outsource. One of the positions we have in here is focused on insourcing the ability to do 50-60% of that review, so that when we're engaging with outside legal counsel, it's then we have something that is baked, as opposed to just sending them the raw agreement and letting them review. I think part of the rationale for wanting to give you the position detail is, very happy to walk through each position and sort of explain what each position is doing and why that is work that is currently not being done or is being done and we intend to do because it's related to sort of a core functionality, or it's work that we're currently outsourcing to consultants. Happy to do that today. Happy to do that.
Yeah, thank
whenever you'd
you.
like.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Remember who?
No, thank you.
Okay. Tell
Yeah, I have two, one on the one-time unbilled credits to customers. So you mentioned 13.6 million probably wouldn't amount to a huge amount per customer, but what are we talking about there? Like,
Yeah, so if you say, I'm just going to do the quick math here because it's moving around. So if you think, I'm going to focus on residential because the math is a little bit harder for larger customers. So if you say 13.5 million, you say roughly half of our consumption is residential. So you divide that by 2, so it's 6.75. We have roughly 500,000 accounts, 550,000 residential accounts. So you divide that by 550, 6 divided by 550. You're going to see a $12 one-time bill credit for a residential customer.
so not a huge impact on there.
It's not a huge impact. No, I think it's just, but if you think about $12 sort of discount, and you think about, say, Renewable 100 is roughly a $1 premium. What the result at the new level, what you're actually creating is over the course of the year, it is really it's price parity. I think that the reason why we proposed last year, and I believe the board approved this approach around a dividend because of the volatility. I think when, say, a city is setting your budget, you do have volatility in, say, like tax revenues. Tax revenues can go up and down, but historical markers hopefully are pretty good reflections of what your tax revenue is going to be. Here, you can have a 30% swing, and it's totally outside of your control because you had extreme weather in Texas, and that has like a trickle-down effect. And so because of that sort of extreme volatility, if you want to say, we want to create some customer benefit from these incremental revenues, but we want to do it in a way that is reflective of the fact that, like, it could be 20 million, it could be 5. Well, how best to do that? You could do it as, you could give it as a one-time benefit. You could also, apply it to the customer bill the next fiscal year, every month. There's no right answer. I think from a billing operations perspective, it's just a little easier to do it once than spread it out over 12 months.
And when do you time that? Sorry, when do you typically do that?
I think we're going to try to do it for the August bill that people pay in September, and that's largely because August bills tend to be high because you have a lot of, it's hot air conditioning.
You're not speaking to the care and fair credit, but rather the
So
customer.
that's what we did for the
We
Karen.
did.
I think the point would be, we would try to do it all probably at the same time, and you want to.
My only note was, we might want to complete the audit, so we really know what that surplus is, but obviously our forecast that by August is pretty good. So there's sort of.
Yeah, I
that's
think,
part of the
fair enough. I think you want to focus on, I think Andy and I have not been, we've been talking about August or September because you tend to have customers tend to have a relatively higher bill. You could push it to January because the biggest
Winter
bills
bills.
tend to be like December bill and like August, September bills are the biggest bills. And so you just want it to go at a time when, it's going to feel like, okay, like my bill's not as high. But there's no right answer there either for when you do it. Sorry.
No worries. And my other question was on the energy expenses and the monthly chart we had of, it says that on average, we're hitting what it was last year, but obviously there's one big outlier in December. What's our rationale for not having our expected be, because our highest on our expected is in January, and not in December again? What's our rationale for not expecting that to happen again? And I'm not saying it's wrong. it's
Yeah, I mean,
Why?
can we go back to that slide? Chart, just show it.
Slide 7.
Slide 7.
Okay, so, I mean, look, what we do see here is it's higher than it was. And I think that that's a reflection of just kind of where forward prices are. So a lot of this is based on, you take a look at where the forward price curve is, because that's today. If we wanted to hedge against that month today, that's what we're paying in the market to hedge against it.
I think the market is sort of capturing that volatility.
exactly.
But the market's not going to predict it's this month it's going to come. So that's why you see the gray line is a little bit above the orange with sort of an assumption you're going to get some type of heat wave or cold storm. That's going to get built in there, but they just say we're going to add that in overall across the curve.
Yeah.
Which to Nick's earlier point also is why you don't necessarily want to overhedge, because you kind of know those forward prices are elevated to expect something there.
And it may not happen, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes the worst thing to have happen is to pay way too much and then the thing doesn't occur. And then every unit of energy is really high as opposed to just like a few hours paying really, really high. I mean, it's a risk assessment.
All done? Okay. Member Cobb, did you have questions or you asked them along the way?
No, I'm good.
And would you like would you like them to present when they take it to the full board, the concept of the discount versus the carbon free?
That'd be nice to, we have to invite that discussion.
Okay.
And then, whatever you want to say in the staff report to your recommendation, but at least to have a discussion for the board.
Okay, great.
Member Marquez?
Sure, thank you. What's the status of issuing the community grants? Where are we at with that timeline?
I think we're kind of in the engagement process. I know we've been trying, the big focus has been staffing internally so that we can have the capability to actually manage the process. So we hired a couple months ago, the colleague who's going to be leading that. And so I think they have been developing the plan to start that, and believe where we stand is it's kind of pending at the to start working with the CAC to develop the scope and develop a plan for, it's in process.
And that'll be an RFP rollout. People will be able to apply.
Yeah, I mean, that's the intent, right? I think that the direction we had gotten from the board last year is to say, we want to do fewer, larger grants that are multi-year. So you have sort of persistence of funding as opposed to lots of $10,000 grants to 50 different organizations. One that's very administratively burdensome for us just to go through that. There's a lot of legal expense because you have to negotiate grant agreements, and when you have that many, you don't really have the ability to follow up to see what the effect is. You know, when you're giving somebody $10,000 or $15,000, can't really like, it's hard to say, and I want you to provide quarterly reports with progress updates for what you're doing. Whereas if you say, I'm going to give you $100,000 over the next 3 years, they might be able to actually fund a new position. And it gives them some confidence, like, we're going to have this funding, we can pursue this initiative that we're proposing.
Can I ask a follow-up on that if I may?
Sure.
So my follow-up on that is, do you exclude people because you get so large, you're not able to, you know, should there be some other bolt-on or some kind of, I'll call it like a light program, so that you're not excluding people that are not needing $100,000, you know?
We do like what we call community grants. So we have a program, we go quarterly out for, these are grants for $2,500.
Okay,
So, you know, it's,
sounds like the missing middle all of a sudden, because you're either getting $2,500 or you get
yeah,
100.
I think the issue that we found is like the missing, like that middle is actually the most problematic part, because you're giving them considerable money, $25,000, but you really can't provide the oversight. If you're giving $2,500 to the Little League or the municipal band, you're just writing the check and saying, okay, we trust you. When you're giving 100,000, you say, I want reports, but if you're giving 25 or 50,000, it's hard to provide that oversight, and you don't want those funds misused either. And so that's sort of why we've shifted to sort of bigger or lots of small ones where you're just comfortable.
So one thing I'd want us to consider, the city of Hayward did this really well, is having a fiscal sponsor. So a nonprofit that's more established, they could partner with those that don't have the capacity. I think that's the best way to kind of leverage those dollars to ensure we're not missing that middle, so that the resources go back out to the community. So that's something I'd like us to look into. I'm a little bit concerned about the local development budget decreasing by 1.5 million. So I'd like to see if we could at least match it to what we did last year. I know all of the funds haven't been expended, but just something to consider. On the slide, there was, I don't remember which one it was, but there was a value for depreciation. Is that our equipment?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, I apologize, I have to leave. I apologize.
no worries. I get it. We're all triple scheduled. Yeah, so I thank you for all the questions previously asked and the presentation. I actually noticed the trend lines as well, and I think you've hit on it, so you've answered my question. But you know, revenues, at least from budget to the current budget, year over year budget, right? 121% increase. Energy expense, 130% increase, budget to budget though. I mean, I know year to date operating is different because of the spikes, but then overhead and operating 140%. And I think I hear you saying, well, that's because we budget full FTEs as we talked about. So you know, our net effect is not much year over year revenue increase or position change, right? Because our expenses are increasing greater than the revenues. So I guess trend lines and based on the marketing expense and the full-time equivalents, that is staff's plan, I guess.
Yeah,
willingly or knowingly.
I would say, like, if we were to maintain the same value propositions of 3% instead of 5%, and you were stay on the same sort of procurement course, you would actually see like our revenue growth much more in line with our net income growth.
Mhm.
Because it's about 35 million. Like we are structurally, forget local development or staffing, we are structurally increasing our costs by almost $30 million mostly it's by increasing the discount.
Right.
By increasing the discount, we are essentially giving back almost $30 million to consumers that we would not have, you know, that's in a way that's different than we did last year.
Okay.
And so if you were to add that, that would take us to more like $210 million in net operating income.
Right.
And that $210 million net operating income relative to energy expense is probably, from a ratio perspective, is probably like
Right
it's
on
actually
line.
higher. It's right in line with what it was last year.
Yeah.
So the big difference really here is, in terms of like growth, is really that we're giving more back to the consumer
Okay.
and we're increasing our carbon-free content. And that's, you know, you don't have to do those things. You could wait a year, see how things end, and then you could give a bigger dividend or buy more carbon-free content in the future once you wait and see how things go.
Yeah, okay, and now I'll go to his, member Calv's question when we go to the full budget on that discount. Okay, and then the other thing I noticed is, on the one chart, and it's slide 3, but it's basically your beginning reserve balance is 230 mil. And the target is 367. We're adding 100 million if this budget pencils out. Pretty close to this target, right? I mean, so looks like we might achieve that in 24, 25, possibly. I know it,
Yeah.
it all is dependent on how the other lines go, right?
Right.
And then we could plow more into local development or some other things. and
Well,
that's our
yeah,
plan.
I think that that's right. So like, once you have hit your sort of financial reserve targets with strict reserves and also working capital targets,
Mhm.
you find yourself in a position where you are really structurally advantaged. And so you may say, at that point in time, we could offer an even deeper customer discount. We can buy
Right, we-
even more carbon free, and we can make even more local investment.
Okay.
Next weekend.
Also,
Once we
just
do.
keeping in mind, the reserve policy itself has a target of 50%, has a band of 25 to 75%. So certainly there's a discussion with the board as to
How close?
50%, or do we want excess, or so, there's obviously a decision there. And then the other point is that operating target is based off of your projected expenses, which
Right, so,
our conversation on volatility of energy prices, that can change, and we've seen that over the last couple of years. That has
Yeah.
increased substantially. So hard to say what the projection will be next year. Will it continue to increase? In which case that number, the dollar number, will actually increase beyond what we're seeing now. Whereas, of course, if it stays flat, then we're going to be right around that 50% mark.
and my other question to that is, these reserves are unrestricted in any way? Are they, any problems with them, or well, not problems, any restrictions on them? Are they?
Staff does not have any discretion to spend that. So in that sense.
So it's like they're not restricted by our bank.
Right,
No, there's no, like,
or
covenant.
the vehicle they're in, or.
There's no
Correct,
covenant
right.
in our bank agreement that says that you must do this, you must do that. I mean, the restriction is to be able to draw on reserves, you have to go to the board. So it's a policy
The
restriction.
board's not restricted.
Contract.
Staff is, of course, restricted.
Yeah, and maybe that's what I'm asking, right? They're not in vehicles that restrict the maturities of them or anything like that. They're just, okay.
No, we separately have sort of a treasury management to do of optimizing.
I think
sort of
that's
cash
actually the main
management
thing
that we want to do.
I think the
as
main thing
well.
actually that we will be coming back to the board is say, these are considerable cash balances. Given the current, say, interest rate environment, might we actually want to evaluate some, structures that have
A ladder or
some
something.
restriction? Because if you can say get a 5.5, if you can say, I'm gonna put this in there's a 6-month restriction, to your point, a ladder, right? You say, we want to put 25% of our reserves in a structure where there is a draw restriction, but that's gonna result in a 200 basis point increase in the interest rate. So we're actually generating way more interest income off of that. Right now, we're not maximizing. And some of that's just a function of the rate environment has changed really fast. And we've been focused more on the downside risks of our funds as opposed to pursuing the upsides of that changing rate environment.
And obviously balancing that with the inherent risk in your energy price volatility and wanting to make sure you have some
Right.
liquidity that's immediately available.
Well, and that's maybe a better way to have asked it. I apologize. It's, the liquidity of it. Is it liquid that we could get it?
It is entirely.
Very
liquid. Yeah.
Okay. And then I'll just, since I don't know the structure of it, FDIC and insurance and banking risk and any of that other elements in play here?
So
or we?
under California state law, banks have, or public agencies, they have to have a one-to-one, they have to hold one-to-one cash
I think it's
collateral.
125.
Or 125.
So it's over collateral.
Right, so they have to over collateralize our accounts, and that collateral is restricted. So like in the case of a bankruptcy, that collateral does not go into the bankruptcy
No risk.
estate.
Great.
So, and then there are other tools that we can use that we use and are evaluating as well to further de-risk.
And just to be clear, that those funds that are not in an insured cash sweep are over collateralized, and those that are in an insured cash sweep are insured.
FDIC.
So, yeah,
So we're managing that. If there was a bank risk, we're managing the bank.
yes, we definitely
We've
some
also-
more evaluation in light of the
And we-
bankruptcy.
I didn't think First Republic was gonna go down. Yeah, so.
So, yeah.
Okay. Were there any other questions that any other members had on this
No, I
item?
just want to make sure I get to public comment. I have to leave in like 10 minutes.
Yeah, so we did public comment initially, but
Oh,
if,
not on this item.
oh, sorry, good point. Thank you, apologize. Yeah, so I'll open up to public comment on this item, which is now item number, what are we on? 5.
Thank you.
Sure, I have a lot of questions and feelings about the budget, obviously, but one of the higher level ones that I would like to see. And just recognizing that I appreciate that there will be discounts given. And $12 is meaningful, but it's not transformative. And I think that the investments in the local development business plan, particularly are those that are offering no cost or very little cost in the communities that need the investment, is very important and impactful over time. And one of the things that I want to point out is like the community resilience, $2 million. I do think that that should be prioritized and increased. I think that it should be clarified exactly what that is in detail, because it's pretty generalized here. I think that, I do have specific feelings about the community innovation grants, but particularly because they have not been given out since 2019. I do appreciate that there's an effort to offer a significant amount of money, but I do think that that pot of money should be replenished every year, and that the opportunity for those grants is offered annually as well. Yeah, I think what I would like to see is just really a breakdown of how, how much of this is actually money coming from EBCE, money coming from actual grants outside of EBCE, and then also, I think also another thing that I feel like I should be clarified too is when there's a program that's funded by somebody outside, like the CPUC, for example, that's made clear, and what actual monies come from the agency. Those are my thoughts. I do think that there's a lot of room here for resourcing microgrids with community-based organizations. And I do think that this is a good time to start that. And I also want to appreciate the fiscal sponsorship idea, because during 2020, many community organizations that functioned as mutual aid and response did not have fiscal sponsorship or 501c3 status. And therefore that meant that they weren't eligible for grants. So I just want to appreciate that that was put on the table. And I think that's it.
Okay,
Stop there.
thank you. And yep, go ahead, Travis, right?
Yeah, Travis. So yeah, continuing on the theme of microgrids, which is really what I'm here to advocate for. So on page 5, I see the 13.6 million for long-term renewable energy, clean energy storage investments. And I don't know if you have a clear vision for what that means or what that could look like. But I think there could be really an incredible opportunity to focus on deploying storage in like carefully chosen sites that could be used for peak shaving in the evenings, but can also be used as resilience hubs during moments of crisis. I'm thinking, most of the schools in Alameda County already have solar, so it would be kind of low-hanging fruit to add battery backup to those to create resilience hubs. But then that in blue sky conditions could also be used as for peak shaving. And yeah, looking at the community resilience, the 2 million on page 18, like Jessica just pointed out, yeah, it seems as though there's a lot of space to grow that. I know with the federal government under the Justice 40 initiative, if you're targeting sites that explicitly are serving marginalized and vulnerable communities, you can access a lot of money that way. And I know that the CEC is facilitating a lot of money for storage, but not necessarily solar. So I think scenarios in which buildings that are used by the community already have solar, there could be a lot of funding available towards adding that storage. So yeah, I want to strongly advocate for that 13.6 million to be considered really strongly in that direction.
Okay, thank you. Are there any public comment online?
Yes, Barbara Stebbins.
Okay, Barbara. Please.
Barbara Stebbins just took her hand down. Recognized for 3 minutes.
There we go. All right. So Barbara Stebbins with Local Clean Energy Alliance. The $2 million resilient communities figure really stood out to me, especially in a year in which California has particularly been targeted with worsening climate change effects, including, massive flooding and unprecedented snowpack and all of that. And we know the cost to local historically under-resourced communities in EBCE's jurisdiction. I mean, not only, they're still recovering from COVID and all the job loss that happened there. And then to be hit with high winds and torrential rains. It seems like 2 million is not enough of a $21 million kind of local development package to be spent on community resilience. So we'd really like to see that number increased. And I think both Jessica Tovar and Travis have pointed out some good ways to do that, that would not only benefit people in the community, but would also benefit EBCE in terms of, having access to energy in storage that they could utilize during peak load times. So that's my comment.
Thank you. And that concludes, okay, no more public speakers, so we'll close the public comment and we'll bring it back to the executive committee. With that, Member Hu, do you have any comments? Or actually, if I may, before I do that, can I ask staff maybe to talk about the comment about the microgrids, and is that part of this community resilience, and is this budget for that? And
So I would say actually what's critical here in the community resilience is the $2 million does not represent the investment in microgrids. We have a model that we're currently pursuing with 30 microgrid projects. In our first round, we have another 100 that are in development and potentially many, many more behind that, depending on our ability to secure Department of Energy funds. Those are cost neutral to EBC. So we're actually not booking them against them. Those are going to result in tens, potentially north of $100 million of local investment. But the structure of the program is such that it doesn't actually cost East Bay Community Energy, there's no net income effect because of the structure of the program and our securing external financing, not funding, with external financing to be able to pay for these microgrids. So the $2 million is really money that we're spending to facilitate the ability to access tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of funds for these resilient microgrids. We've focused first, our first phase have been on critical municipal facilities, because first and foremost, because of their requirement to be 100% open access. When you start moving into the sort of privately owned or community-based organizations, the issue you do run into is you cannot guarantee the property won't be transferred. So we've actually run into an issue where with a potential community-based microgrid where it was a community-based organization, then they sold the building to somebody else. And so you made the capital investment, but now you can't guarantee long-term access. Similarly, when you have a privately owned facility, whether it's a community-based organization or a company, how do you ensure that anybody who needs to go use that facility will use it? That is not an issue that you run into when you have a municipal facility. So that is part of the rationale there. To the question about school, so we focused on municipal facilities really being city facilities because of our close relationship with our cities. I think in our next phase, especially if we're able to secure Department of Energy funding, we will really widen our aperture to include school districts because there is such a significant deployment of solar. It's a really kind of there's great synergy opportunity with schools. There are a lot of details that need to be worked out around. Actually, you have to get the facilities department. There's a lot of specific details there, but schools are going to be very clearly part of our next tranche of facilities that we focus because of the clear opportunity and the clear benefits that schools would provide to the community. So.
Okay, and the follow-up to that, is that something in the next, as you think about the next round and you're talking about the schools, is that something in a 1-year horizon, 2-year horizon, 3-year, what's your?
I would say we'll probably, again, it's how quickly we say move to schools is going to be somewhat based on the amount of funding. So we're going after 8-figure funding from the Department of Energy. If we're able to secure that funding, we're very quickly going to have to go and target hundreds or potentially 1,000 facilities to be able to. So
Utilize.
I think if we get those funds, we'll go a lot faster. If we don't get those funds, it's probably we start talking to schools in not this fiscal year. This fiscal year, we're focusing on scaling from 30 to 130, 150 municipal facilities. Once we have those kind of locked in, then we will go to the next phase.
Okay. All right. So Member Hewitt, I apologize. Any comments that you would like to make?
Oh, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Tillman.
Yeah, overall, I think this is great. I'm really happy to see us investing more in staff and having more staff come on board. I think there's one thing that I would flag that I'd like to see discussed at the full board. It's that one-time bill credit from our surplus. I'm always in favor of giving money to folks to spend, but it needs to happen in a way that has a substantive effect, and $12 is great, but it's not huge. Whereas, if we invested that 13 million in, having more clean energy or local programs, much more efficient economies of scale, possibly a bigger effect, probably more targeted to help people who are on the lower income spectrum than giving it to all of our customers. So, I recognize that we can't budget that because it's relying on surplus. We don't know exactly how much it's going to be, but I'd love to see us discuss alternatives of where that could be programmed. That's a little bit more, focused on programs or investment in services, something like that.
Member Marquez.
I apologize for being late and I apologize after leaving like 2 minutes. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you all.
Would you like any snacks? I feel bad. We were eating.
I know. Watching you all.
Snacks.
That's okay.
Could I ask you, apologize, the recording started late. And so Adrian and I would like to try to have your comments that initially during the open public comment period captured. So if you don't mind, just maybe, do you have a few more moments that we can get that written down and we can include those in the minutes?
Or you
We
can email.
have a
It's
meeting.
easier.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest if we could
Please do.
send you our. comments.
Please do. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll take
And do you
that.
have
Some
That's
snacks.
tangerine.
Yeah, no.
And do you have Adrian's, I'm sure you have Adrian's contact information.
I love a tangerine too.
Yeah, okay.
So should I email it to?
You can email it to myself or Adrian. Do you have Adrian? Do you
Yeah, I have
Can I get your
Adrian's contact.
Perfect. Thank you so
I
much.
didn't bring any cards, but
I
I
have
We have a speaker slip also, if you could.
oh, yeah. speaker stuff.
paperwork.
Real quick. It's probably
Thank
fine to just email that, right? Or you don't need,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't need a speaker. to slip.
Thank you about that. Sorry about that initially.
Yeah.
A little rough this morning.
Appreciate it.
Yes.
I
Thank you. No,
apologize.
no,
Any
it's
further-
okay.
I know it's,
I agree with your comments. I think whenever we're looking at, my preference is options, like to quantify, right? I appreciate the discount, but I think we could be more impactful in other ways. I'd like to see a cost out if we decide to divert that money to investing in more renewable energy, expanding programs. I just think it's best when we have options to consider. So I agree with that comment. And I do have to go. Sorry.
no room.
Thank you.
And I'll just quickly wrap up as well. My general comment is if we get to a midterm or mid-year update where we're seeing the savings from the vacancy of the staff, that we look at where we're allocating that, whether it's coming straight down to the bottom line or whether we are putting it to community resilience or one of these other programs, right? So we're funding the savings somewhere else. And I don't know how that plays in with Member Kalb's comment about, are we giving more discount to buy more carbon free or, all of that. But I think for the full board, probably that could be a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the, I will note, particularly in local development, frankly, like one of the things we struggle with, and you can see it in sort of the carryover balances is it's hard, like.
Hard
it's
to
actually-
place exactly those dollars.
Well, it's harder, it takes longer than you want to place, and there is no strat unless you're just going to give money away.
Right.
And even when you give money away, it's actually harder than you think, because you don't just want to give it away. You want to have like guardrails away. And we tend, I have had a philosophy that we want to try, especially in local development, to create sustainability, long-term funding sustainability. And so part of that long-term funding sustainability is to, when possible, focus on, when possible, to focus on models that are going to recycle our capital as opposed to grants. So the end result is we tend to focus on things that are going to create recurring revenue, which take longer to set up than just saying, we're giving money away and we're giving, because you give grants, of course you can write those checks, but then what happens in a year or 2 years or 3 years when times are a little bit leaner and you're suddenly in a position where you say, well, I can't do that anymore.
Right.
And so again, that is why I think they're in the same way with renewable energy, where like there's only so much you can buy. We want to be cognizant of there's only so much there's only so much we can effectively manage from a local programs budget. But that being said, those are great comments, and there are options that we can present. I do think one of the more effective ways to spend some of these dollars is to reserve these dollars to buy some long-term project. Like, there may be a battery project that we said, gosh, this battery project is a little expensive. We wouldn't necessarily, so we might go and say, we're going to take $20 million and say, we're basically gonna allocate $1 million a year for the course of the 20-year agreement to buy down the cost of that incremental battery project or that incremental solar project, which then has a long-term benefit for us, that like that project is now less expensive. It's almost like a prepayment in a sense. So it creates, so let us.
And that's in
evaluate those
this
structures.
year's.
But
budget,
I
to
think
be
the
clear,
point
that
being is that
structure.
you could shift more of those dollars.
Yeah.
To, but I also do, this is sort of hard, this is hard for us to sort of really quantify, but I do want to be cognizant of, rates are getting really expensive.
Yeah.
And that's for residents, but it's also for businesses. And that has an overall sort of negative impact on our, on the communities we serve, right? If businesses feel like their energy expenses are too high, they're going to move somewhere where they're less expensive. Then people lose their jobs. Or consumers are saying, hey, I can't afford to pay the bills anymore. I can't. And so I think that is, and $12 is not going to make, hopefully doesn't make or break too many, or the equivalent, might be $200 for a small business, may not make or break, but part of it is a philosophy where in a year or two, we may be saying, hey, we don't need to contribute to reserves. So we actually have a much bigger pool of money, $100 million, not $12 million. Like, well, is that, if we say $100 million, every customer is going to get a $75 dip. Like that actually may make a difference for somebody. And so there is that, like, putting money in people's pockets to be able to let them make decisions for themselves versus making kind of specific investment decisions that benefit some but not everybody. I think we try to just find that balance between helping everyone, focused clean energy investments that should help everyone, but are definitely going to have more pointed benefits.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'll just follow up on that by saying I thank you for offering that further explanation. I'm very cognizant of it. I think I'm more willing to talk about reallocating this to not being one time on bill because we're already reducing rates.
Yeah.
So we are, providing that benefit in multiple ways right now.
Right.
And if we're gonna reduce rates, we can provide it in other ways.
I think the idea though around really sort of let us put our thinking caps on about kind of, especially that we're in the market to buy some renewable energy projects. I think that like there's probably a win-win there where you can essentially take some funds and use it as a prepayment or a sort of not exactly prepayment, but fund some projects you might not otherwise, that we're gonna have to buy eventually. Because the reality is, we have to buy, whether we buy it now or buy it in 2 years, eventually we have to get to 100%, right? So like, that is just coming. So if you buy it a little earlier, that might actually have a long-term benefit for cost management too. So let us think about like, maybe there's some advantages.
We thought about
allocating more
reserving some of that money, basically dripping that out over a project that may have a slight premium right now by accelerating, bringing that project online. So we can offer some thoughts around that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll close that item. Item 6, community member or staff announcements, including requests to place items on future committee agendas. Seeing none, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. Adrian, I made it rough at the start. I was nervous.